Taoiseach, barring any unexpected accidents, you are expected to become Taoiseach again in a few months. And in the meantime, you retain responsibility for policy and legislative matters relating to enterprise, trade and employment. The welfare of businesses, industry and, most of all, consumers all fall within your current remit. Now, as you'll be aware, many have commented this morning already, that we've had stark warnings from EirGrid indicating that the gap between electricity demand and supply will likely get worse. The CEO told RTE this morning that he cannot guarantee that there will not be blackouts. This is a shocking development which will concern thousands of homeowners and businesses, as well as damaging our reputation abroad. What's really shocking is that yet again we have the spectacle of regulatory state agencies arriving breathless and somewhat puzzled at the scene of the latest threatened blight to hit the beleaguered public. Lasceann Corla, would the Taoiseach agree that now is the time for him and his government colleagues to carry out an urgent review of the effectiveness of the various regulatory state agencies that are well paid to oversee key sectors or activities? Either they should perform or be abolished. We have EirGrid, the transmission system operator, and the Commission of the Regulation of Utilities, who, when not squabbling with each other, have allowed a situation to develop here where we have imminent threats of blackouts and rapidly increasing energy costs. We have the Competition and Consumer Protection Authority that seems to be a spectator to price rises, hitting consumers, and it seems unable to tackle price gouging. The CCPC are also pretty useless when it comes to tackling the scourge of insurance costs. We have an aviation regulator who failed to spot the unfolding crisis in Dublin Airport this year. We have a central bank which, despite its role in the collapsing of the banking system, subsequently failed to detect the tracker mortgage scandal, which was only brought to its attention by a committee of this House. And we have the planning regulator, who seems blind to what is happening in Onboard Pleanála until an online site published allegations. The incompetence of the Road Safety Authority is legendary at this stage, and it's ironic that they require HGV drivers to acquire a certificate of professional competence. It's the drivers who should be setting a course of competence for the RSA. Now, SIPO, while competent in its duty, is powerless to stop unethical behaviour by senior officials. And we even have the government appointing impugned officials to state boards following their censure by SIPO. And while I'm at it, we also have a complete failure on the part of multiple state agencies to enforce the existing legislation prohibiting the curse of online gambling and its affliction and the affliction of hardship on thousands of families nationally. At what stage, Taoiseach, is the government going to demand that these entities do their job and fulfil their functions? Because the public are sick and tired of their useless regulatory bodies who arrive breathless at the scene of the latest outrage, looking for more powers and resources.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I think there's a lot in that question, and it's very hard to answer it comprehensively in the time that's allowed. I don't think your characterisation of our regulatory structures is entirely fair. They're not perfect, but many of them have served us very well in recent years. But that's not to say that there haven't been flaws and haven't been failings. And it is important to bear in mind that some of these regulators are actually accountable directly to the Oireachtas, not to the government. That's the way they've been established, as being directly accountable to the Oireachtas and not the government, and they're held to account through the Oireachtas committee structure. In relation to energy, the review is already underway. Some months ago, Dermot McCarthy, the former SecGen government, was appointed to review the regulatory system that we have for energy to identify why things went wrong and what we can do to make sure they don't go wrong in the future. One thing I do want to say, and I want to restate what the CEO of EirGrid said this morning. He said it was important to note that there is no risk of a system-wide blackout. Rather, there may be periods where total supply does not meet demand. And while nobody can rule out the possibility of blackouts over the winter, I do want to say to families, to homeowners, to small businesses, to farms, the chances of a blackout or a prolonged blackout affecting them is very low. And I think a lot of people are engaging in worrying people about this. We can't rule it out, but the risk of having that kind of blackout is very low, because if we do enter a red alert scenario, it is the large energy users that come offline first, like the data centres, for example, and they have their own generating capacity. It takes quite a lot of events to come together for us to be in a position where there would have to be power cut to homes, farms, businesses. And I think it's important that we reassure people that that's the case. It didn't happen last winter. Nobody can say it won't happen this winter, but I think it is unlikely. And finally, I think there's one thing that we do know. We don't know everything about this matter, but there's one thing that we do all know, is that fundamentally the problem here is one of inadequate supply. Not enough generators generating electricity. We have a rapidly growing population. We have a rapidly growing economy. And because of the need to take climate action, we're moving a lot of things to electricity. More electric vehicles, more heat pumps, etc. And all of those things contribute to rising electricity demand. And that demand is going to rise further. The solution to that is a lot more generation capacity. That was licensed, that was contracted. The generators didn't deliver. Now we're in a catch-up phase. But we have a plan to catch up, to put that generation capacity in place, both renewables and gas, because both are necessary, and to get ahead of this in the years ahead.
Verona Murphy.
I would have thought that the idea of all of what I mentioned and all of the regulators I mentioned was that we wouldn't be catching up, that they would outline the problems, that they would foresee the issues. Instead, in everybody I mentioned, it's been brought to their attention. And I think that's the reality of where we are today. We're constantly behind the curve. My group, the regional technical group, brought a motion to this House in relation to energy, if you're concerned about blackouts. We asked that you don't deconstruct Derry Bryan, that we paid the fine to the EU, and we continue with the energy supply to 40,000 homes that the 70 wind turbines would provide. 40,000 homes. We also said that we would reignite, we suggested we'd reignite the two Lanesborough and Shannon Bridge, none of which was taken on board. So that, when you say, I don't understand why we have the regulator on the radio this morning saying that we're in danger of blackouts, and you say it's very unlikely, and then you say don't frighten people. Who's frightening the people? It's the inaction is frightening the people.
Thank you, Deputy. To conclude.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And I appreciate the fact that the regional group are putting some solutions forward in this regard, and they need to be considered. I think one of the reasons why keeping Derry Bryan going doesn't necessarily make sense is that when the energy system is short, when we're short of generating capacity, it's when the wind is not blowing. That's essentially at the heart of a lot of the problems that we have. We have a lot of renewable energy. The risk of a blackout or brownout occurs only when the wind is not blowing. So that's why Derry Bryan, keeping that online, isn't particularly useful in terms of the energy crunch that we face. In relation to Lanesborough and Shannon Bridge, as you know, they created a lot of employment in the Midlands for a long time, but peat by its very nature didn't produce an awful lot of energy. And what we plan to do with some of the plants in the Midlands, one is going to biomass, with the others is to use them for battery storage. So that we can use the wind power and renewables, which is not dispatchable but can be stored, and that might make more sense, both in terms of energy security and also the environment as well.